Okay, good afternoon. I think I'm the only one sitting between you and lunch, so I'm going to try to keep it to the point. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about a project that we did together with Jacob Douw-Egberts, a company that I'm sure you know really well. So I'll start with the company introductions, and then we're going to focus on why there was why JDE decided to have to run an IBP project. What the challenges were, and then also there will be a few of the key messages. And those are going to be very simple. The change management part in any S&OP project, as I'm sure you all know, is going to be super important. But there's a bit of an obvious statement, but that the automation can also help to sometimes make breakthroughs, because otherwise, if we don't make life easy for people, they might even be willing to, but they don't know how. So that's going to be the core message of this few slides. But before that, let me briefly introduce Involvation. So what we do is we specialize supply chain management, and we try and cover basically the whole tactical area. So network optimization, S&OP, IBP is probably 50-60% easily of our portfolio. And then we link to that always digital planning systems will always be in that area somehow. But at the same time, we therefore find it very important to be completely independent of any software or other vendor. So let's leave it at that for the commercial part. JDE, Jacob Douw-Egberts, I'm sure you know really well. They make lots of coffee, sell lots of coffee every year, super quality. Globally, and also I think it's a super nice company to work for, so I really enjoyed the project that we did together with them. So JDE was already running quite an advanced IBP process. Why do I say IBP? Because Bram already introduced in the previous session, we introduced the link between volume and financial planning. And you could quite easily argue that they're already doing this and have been doing this for quite a while. There's only one way they run the business. They make a volume plan. They make it to turn that exact same plan into financials, including risk and ops to be able to play around with some differences sometimes. And that's the plan. There's nothing else. So you could argue, well, why do we need something more than this? But what they had found is specifically, some years ago, of course, with all the bigger disruptions in supply, COVID, and the subsequent disruptions, that the world had changed from enabling fast growth to, well, maybe not always growth is going to be automatic. We also need to be able to optimize our margins. And therefore, we also may want to revisit our planning processes. So they defined a project called IBP Reset, and the objectives were to support decision making, really maximizing the value. Let's make it a very efficient process, and also I think probably not unimportant. They're still running on APO, has to be replaced. So if you want to do a re-implementation or a new implementation of a system, of course it makes a lot of sense to first revisit your processes before you sort of configure that in your system, and then you're stuck with the process that you have. So a number of quite good motivations to change the system. When they said IBP, we will see that. I mean, we first said, well, where does IBP exactly sit? And I'm sure you know this. This picture where we have the strategic plan. We have the annual plan, static for the year. Around this time of the year, you will have your next AOP. And then we get the main role of IBP, which is to deliver that AOP and to enable the strategic plan. So quite an ambitious process that was running quite well already. And then for the very short term, we have a separate process, although very, very closely linked, a term that didn't exist a few years ago, but that is now coming sort of quite standard, which is the S&OE. So this is the theory, and in practice, though, you will see, and we find that with actually quite a lot of companies, that they all exist, but really if you dive into it, it's more myopic than this. So year-end plays a big role, specifically when you start to introduce finance, obviously. But also the horizons tend to be shorter than you would like to have. Because the S&OE, in the previous pictures, it looked really small, 3 months, but an S&OE process that really covers 3 months fully and IBP doesn't get involved, well, I've not even seen one company that does that way. It's never like this. So one of the things that we said, well, if we want IBP to really do its job and deliver the strategy, then actually maybe we have to start at the foundations and make sure that we also have an S&OE process that really picks up the short term. So you might think that we were going to talk about IBP, but in fact the project was much more about S&OE with the idea that if we have a solid S&OE process, we will enable IBP, which is the process that has been designed really well already, to really do its job. So there were a number of objectives that you can read yourself, and there were a few things that we really wanted to be in there. One is to get it even more decision making rather than just seeing how things were going. We wanted it to be longer term, so not just this week, next week, but also let's really try and push it to 9, 12 to 13 weeks. And we also wanted to do scenario analysis and value thinking. What's value thinking is the main objective was to not find a feasible solution that will work, but also maybe identify 2 or 3 options and then look at the cost side of it or the benefit side of it, make it financial and say, well, which is the best one? And the ideal end state would then be top quality decisions covering 13 weeks and IBP not discussing about the short term completely anymore. So that's the content part. So we had a number of design elements. So we said we used all the elements that were in place already, just basically redraw the flow a little bit. And then we also built an automated template, push button, that sort of followed the standard agenda, and they already had a complete data lake in place, so it could grab all the data and just basically use that to help the people preparing these meetings to get all the data, just basically push button on the table. And the same thing for a scenario planning tool that could convert volume into planning automatically, so you would make life really simple for the practitioners. So that's the hard part, the logic part. Now, at the start, I said, well, you're going to talk about change management, and in change management, we tend to use a very simple model that says if you want to get from an idea to a realization, you need to always think about 4 aspects. We just talked about the logic, so it's the systems, the KPIs, the process, all the hard stuff that we also tend to feel quite comfortable with. But actually, it starts with the why, the meaning. If there's no why, you might as well not start, because then nobody is ever going to buy it. And even then, if you've done your homework content-wise, people understand the why, we still need to get them into motion to go and start the change. And it will help, of course, if you've done that, but still, very often you see that we still need to make sure that people really get to move and really implement the change. And then lastly, even if you've done all that, you need to be sure that people are actually able to do it. Because even if you've convinced them, but you don't enable them to do it, or they don't know exactly what you mean, then still nothing's gonna work. And there's a multiplier in between, because if one of these aspects is 0, if you've studied math, you know that the answer is going to be 0. Nothing will happen. So in this case, actually, the change management part was not super complex, because basically what we did was still follow the same logic. So we made the design, signed it off with the governance that was already in place. And then for the practitioners, we did a number of global kickoffs and basically explained the meaning and the logic, which were relatively obvious, but still had to be done. Then, if it wants to move, we made sure that people would be enabled. So these templates that JDE developed internally, by the way, were explained one time, but also on a one-on-one basis with the different teams. They got the explanation about how does it exactly work, how do you get your data, how do you prepare your meetings. So you could argue, well, over to you, now go and do it. But then we spent actually probably most of the time guiding the teams, making sure that they indeed were changing it, sort of fly-on-the-wall sessions, assessing the meetings, and that actually created quite a bit of noise. We're going to be assessed, and we need to... So that then started to drive the real change. So following this model, very straightforward steps. In this way, I think we're now in a quite good position to make sure that the S&OP process really starts to make a step. The revisits still need to be done, because I think the idea in any S&OE and S&OP process is that if you don't keep pushing it, you will see that it sort of slowly starts to fade away. So we need to somehow keep it alive. Now, where are we now? So, with the change part, one of the observations was super important. We assessed the meetings, you could see differences, and also you could see that the maturity was going to go up. So that worked, I think, quite nicely. I shouldn't be a surprise, but still, I think that's one of the messages also back to the software vendors here, that there's a role to play. Because we analyzed the quality of the meetings based on these assessments, and also made a comparison between the teams that were already using the new automated template versus the ones that did not. And you could see sort of a massive step change in meeting quality, meeting adherence, agenda adherence, quality of decisions, compared to the teams that did not adopt the new template versus the ones that did. And again, that may be a very, very obvious statement, but what I still learned from it myself is that if you make life easy, the change management can really can get a really big push. So, for example, the value thinking idea, it's a statement. Yeah? It doesn't mean anything if people don't know how. But if they get a tool that can do it for you, you get a push button on your screen, yeah, oh, okay, then all of a sudden, people start to use it. So, concluding basically along these lines, IBP, S&OE are tandem. I think they go hand in hand. If there's no solid S&OE process, then IBP, by definition, is going to dive into the short term, and you start to miss the point, where you're sitting with fairly senior people discussing fairly operational topics. Having an effective S&OE process really enables IBP to focus on the parts that it should be focusing on. Message 1. Message 2 is change management super important, but it's not only the soft side of change management that can be important. It can also be making life very easy as possible to then enable people to do what you would like them to do. That can sometimes be the breakthrough for realizing a change.